On today's edition of the CHGO Cubs podcast, Matt Shaw and Nico Horner updates. The Cubs are still undefeated with a tie in Cactus League play, and we are on a course for the Tokyo series. All of that and more on the Friday edition of the CHGO Cubs podcast. This is the CHGO Cubs podcast. My name is Corey. I am joined, as always, by Brendan. We are coming to you on Friday. It is February 28th. As I said in the cold open, Brendan, like a tie on Thursday, but the Cubs have yet to lose. We will talk about how heavily you should be reading into that on this. No.
Well, they're, on pace for 105 wins if they keep this up, Corey. All the projections were wrong.
Right. Hey, look, I mean, better to have guys playing well and them winning games. It certainly doesn't mean anything, but I do find myself like drop a loss in there. All right. Because like what we don't need is them like on some crazy run going into Tokyo. Then they're definitely losing the real games. Right. Like, so level out a little bit. These ones don't matter, but no, it's nice to see.
It is nice to see. We'll see what happens at third base. We have Vidal Brujan maybe playing third base, Gage Workman playing third base. Maybe those two can propel the Cubs to 105 wins.
Yeah, so do want to talk about that. Some kind of a lot of back and forth, with the Matt Shaw situation. And it kind of sounded initially like it was being reported that he wasn't going to go to Tokyo, but it sounds like that was more perhaps a suggestion, like maybe he won't. It sounds like he's going to start getting in games soon, and they haven't really ruled that out. As far as Nico goes, they have ruled that out, but that was another one, as always, choose who you follow, choose, the reporters you get your news from and consider how they're framing things. That first report came out, it was like, Nico's out for Tokyo. Oh no, let's panic. And the follow-up from counsel was like, but he's on track to be good when we get back to the States and
which
stuff
is
like
good
that.
News.
That's good news.
Great news.
Absolutely. Yeah. So interesting, both of those. We'll talk about kind of how the Cubs are going to deal with that. The one thing I thought of, though, before we go any further was I did see a video the other day with Sammy Sosa in camp, which beautiful sight, by the way. Everybody has said this. You and I only get to, record on Friday, so we're a little late to the game. But like, man, it does make you think, like, just a lot of wasted time of him not being involved in the organization, watching him in the dugout, seeing him in Cubs gear again. But the one thing that made me think of it that you mentioned was I was watching him give a specific instruction, doing the mechanics, changing his hands to Vidal Brujan. And I'm watching the clip going, is it out of the question to suggest that Sammy has just told him something that is going to unlock this former top prospect's MLB career hopes?
If that happens, and that's the greatest comeback of all time of anyone. Also with Sammy Sosa, in the dugout,
Taylor,
got a little goosebumps watching that, the whole piece thing.
Yep.
But Vidal Brujan is likely going to be on this team come the opening Japan series. So as bad as his start to his career has been, with 4 chances at the big league level, he's going to get a 5th. At least that's what we think.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's just, first of all, I think my initial reaction to both the Nico and Shaw news, first of all, it's just good in general that Matt Shaw is going to be getting into game action. I know we've seen him doing some fielding. I think earlier this week he was doing fielding, but not throwing, things like that. That's just good. Obliques, as we always talk about, very scary. I remember, was that last year or 23 when Seiya had the oblique to start the year? Yeah. Like, it's just a word you never want to hear. Go.
And he hurt his oblique the previous year too. So,
Yeah.
back-to-back years.
It gives me like Cole Hamels PTSD. So I'm just not interested in that. But so good that he's going to be getting in that action. And by all accounts, that is not a more serious injury, because those can linger and they often lead to a good chunk of missed time. I'm looking forward to the Tokyo series. You and I were talking to our good friend, Dr. Ryan Tomir, the other day, making plans to, watch the games at 5 a.m. Central Time. So I don't want this to be taken out of context. Like, in reality, though, I don't care about those games. When we're talking about Nico Horner and Matt Shaw, they need to be healthy for the bulk of this season. And an early 2 games in a different country, the long travel, that is not my primary focus. I want them healthy as quick as possible. Those games count. They matter. They're against a very good, obviously, Los Angeles Dodgers team. You want the team at full strength if it's possible. But if there is any itch of rushing these guys, or maybe it would be better just take that extra time, wait until the Cubs are back stateside and starting the rest of their regular season calendar. It seems as though that's obviously the way the Cubs are operating, but just getting those reports the last few days and things like that, the Tokyo series is not where my focus is. It is on the long 162 game season. And if they're without those guys for 2 games, so be it.
So be it. And I think the Cubs will want the extra 2 weeks after the Tokyo series to make a more informed decision on who gets that last spot. And even though Nico's on track to maybe be ready by the real opening day, that's still not a certainty either, nor is it for Shaw to be ready by the Japan series and maybe even opening day as well, even though he's likely going to be ready by then. If we look at the current roster right now, in terms of which positional players are likely going to be on the Japan series roster, the last 3 of 13 slots goes to Vidal Brujan, Gage Workman, and maybe Travis Jankowski, only because Kevin Alcantara has an option. Travis does not. You may want the extra 2 weeks with Travis. And then we have guys maybe like Nicky Lopez might get one of those roster spots, but he's out of options. But you need to make a decision come opening day 2 weeks after whether it's going to be Vidal Brujan or Gage Workman. And that is a legitimate, difficult decision to be made, even though it's the last roster spot. But third base is a sensitive position right now. Justin Turner's taking reps at third base. They need to understand the likelihood of getting value in the next 2 months. And if that's in the form of Vidal Brujan spread throughout the diamond, including third base, or consolidating that defensive value that Gage Workman brings, even though both have not hit, and specifically Gage Workman has not played Major League Baseball. These will have to be ironed out after the Japan series, which makes Nico go on the IL actually kind of advantageous in a weird way.
It's one of those things where it is an interesting thing to kind of budget for this, kind of like it almost makes me think back when I was, working like for the Michigan baseball team in college, like where we would have the Big Ten schedule, but then we would go play like I was a student manager. I wasn't playing.
Well,
I should
you
clarify
were
that.
Major League Baseball, organized Major League Baseball manager for a day.
Yeah. We were not doing anything, but the royal we. We would have the Big Ten schedule, but then go play like a tournament in Florida in the middle of that, like, or right before that, things like that. And, it's not an insignificant amount of time. It's not like they return home to the US and play Arizona the next day. It's over a week later. So that is a significant amount of time for these guys to recover or be taking next steps in their recovery, things like that. So you do kind of have to, I think, treat them as different things. It's hard, I think, to get away that it's, first games of the year. It's going to be a big spectacle, especially with Shohei, Shota, Roki Sasaki, Yamamoto. Seiya Suzuki. Like it's going to be a big event and a big thing, but the Cubs can't prioritize that over their guys' health and stuff like that. I am rather intrigued, as we talked about, with how they're going to go about this roster. Hopefully, by the sound of it, when we really hit the ground running in the regular season, come late March and into April, the health of Shaw and Nico is sorted and they're ready to go and feeling good. But it does, bring up that conversation we had a couple weeks ago about the depth at third base. And, what if Matt Shaw gets hurt, or what if his development needs more time? And, now you're kind of throwing we knew about Nico, but, still kind of waiting on that and the uncertainty. Gonna see that right away. So, whether that is, as you said, Birdie, Workman, Bruhan, however they're going to kind of move these guys around, they are going to have some decisions to make, and some of these guys are going to have to get in there and play. On Thursday, we saw Justin Turner taking reps at third base. So for all the, concern of can he do it, he hasn't really done it very much in the last couple of years. He's 40. So what does that look like at third base? The Cubs, find themselves in a position where it's like, well, we might have to find out, and if guys are hitting and if the lineup is working the way we want it to, going to have to try all options here. So that kind of, hopefully it doesn't turn into a long-term issue and concern, and we can kind of move past that. But we are going to see a little bit of that to kick things off, it does seem.
And the way the Cubs have operated, making these decisions, these back-end roster decisions, it seems fluid. The way you and I talk about those spots now is probably not as binary as it seems in terms of Bruhan versus Workman. For all we know, it could be another cast of guys as well. Even again, Travis Jankowski is also included in that mix, and so is Nicky Lopez. So it may not even be those two guys, but the way Craig Counsell talks, if you pay close attention, it's fluid. It's not making decisions 3 weeks in advance on that day. It's, here are the trends we want to watch. For instance, he talked about Ben Keller, which we'll talk about in a different segment. Here's what we're watching. Here's how we're going to make a decision based on what we're seeing. And we're just going to evaluate as we go. It could be a day, 2, 3 days before they make that decision, because truthfully, they're trying to understand every single detail necessary to come to an informed decision that helps them win those 2 games in Japan, but also, as you pointed out, 10 days later, puts them in position to play 160 remaining games to get the best value, especially in those first 2 months.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to talk about too, we've looked at the pitching staff, the bullpen and stuff, and it does pair, with how you're talking about some of these bench guys. Like the Cubs do have decisions to make. Do they give opportunities to guys
a lot of decisions
that are out of options because that's the choice, or try to, run them through waivers or whatever that process might be? Or do they cut bait with those guys and DFA them and see if they can sneak them through waivers if that's of interest, to go for the guys that do have options, but you want them on the team right away? Though there's a lot of decisions in those areas that the Cubs are going to have to make. And in that conversation, I do want to get your opinion on one Keller. I do hope you have a report prepared on Brad, though. I'm not sure who Ben Keller is.
Did I say Ben Keller?
Yeah.
I'm all over the place, you know?
I just, I have to do that. But it's interesting too. One thing I know I've heard other people talk, I've seen it written about, but one thing I don't think you and I have dug into as much is the Cubs, especially with injuries and things like that, the Cubs have to operate to keep guys healthy and think of the long haul. But especially pairing it with the conversation that we had about potentially saving money for the deadline and being able to allocate that and stay under the tax or whatever that is, the schedule to start the year is pretty tough for this team. It loosens up as the year goes on, but the Cubs are done with the Dodgers and the Padres. They have the Phillies in April. Just looking at the schedule here, they'll have the Rangers. That first month of April features it's going to be some really competitive teams the Cubs are playing. So you can't, you can't rush guys or operate just to attack the April portion of the schedule, but it does all kind of pair together, like that road is not going to be easy. And so if guys are missing time, and as we were just discussing, like, you may not want to cut bait with guys that don't have options, but you need to have the best roster hitting the ground, because otherwise you may find yourself in a little bit of a deficit to start the year. Hopefully that's not the case, but it is just interesting. I fail off the top of my head to remember, like, looking at that first month. Arizona's in there too. Like, I can't really recall looking at a first month, that was quite as competitive or filled with, good teams.
Do you have the schedule in front of you right now?
I do.
So we have Arizona for the first series
Yep.
after Japan, correct?
Yep.
When's Philly?
Philly is the 25th to 27th of April. They also have Arizona at home. So they're getting a lot of the NL West kind of out of the way.
So we have Philly, San Diego, 2 Arizona series. That's how it works.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Well, and I think there's a Pittsburgh in there, and Texas.
Paul Skeens, you don't want to run into that. It's a tough opening series.
We should hit our first ad break too, but one thing I'm going to throw out there right now, like, the Cubs are going to get Paul Skeens every series. You can just book that. However, the rotation works for Pittsburgh, the odds will have it that he will face the Cubs the maximum amount of times. I can guarantee you that. It's just one of those things that the universe is going to force us to deal with. I just know.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
The Brewers will get the 3 through 5 in their rotation every time, and the Cubs will get
Stop it.
Let's hit our first ad break. And also want to let everybody know that towards the end of the show, last segment, we're going to have our guy Jared Willis join us. He is live in Mesa to give us a spring training report. So stick around for that as well. But we are going to hit our first ad break here, and we'll be back in a second.
Lucy, 100% pure nicotine, always tobacco-free. Lucy breakers are nicotine pouches with an extra surprise. Each pouch holds a capsule that can be broken up to release extra flavor and hydration. Set yourself up with a subscription and have Lucy delivered straight to your door. Go to lucy.co/CHGO and use promo code CHGO 2025 to get 20% off your first order. Lucy is a 30-day refund policy. If you change your mind, again, it's lucy.co and use code CHGO 2025 to get 20% off. And here comes the fine print. Lucy products are only for adults of legal age, and every order is age verified. And warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical. Okay, Waymo. Waymo is an autonomous ride-hailing service that operates in the Phoenix metro area. These cars entirely drive themselves using cameras, LiDAR, and radar. Over the past few years, their service has grown to serve a majority of the Phoenix Valley and provides a safer, more eco-friendly ride-hailing service for everyday consumers. Take a Waymo to the Cubs game. Go to those beautiful spring training parks by taking Waymo. There's 150,000 trips per week across San Francisco, LA, and Phoenix using Waymo. Waymo was the first company to serve a fully autonomous ride with no human behind the wheel 10 years ago in 2015. Waymo has over 40 million miles of real-world driving experience. That's enough to drive to the moon and back 80 times. If you are heading out to Arizona for spring training, download the Waymo app and get ready to experience the future.
All right, Brendan.
There's John.
Joined by our guy, John.
Yeah. Give thumbs up.
Johnny, good to see you.
There you go.
All right. I don't know if I have any more on the Shaw Nico stuff. It's good. I think all of it is good news. It sounds like everybody's progressing.
Relatively good news.
Yeah, relatively good news. You know, you want them back healthy and ready for the long haul. So,
well, do you have a preference? Let's say I'm assuming, and I'll put this depth chart back up, but I'm assuming Vidal, Brujan, Gage, Workman, they're going to be on the Japan series roster. That's just my assumption. Maybe Nicky Lopez sneaks in and surprises us, but that's my assumption. But once they go to Arizona, do you have a preference given what you've seen in Workman versus Brujan? I think it's going to come down to one of those two guys.
I don't know, really. I think it would depend on how Shaw is feeling. I think if we feel good about John Birdie and, Shaw is ready and going to be given the opportunity to start every day, I kind of like the versatility, the different positions that Brujan can at least try, the athleticism, the speed. I've liked the defense from Gage Workman, though.
Yeah.
And, as we've said before, I mean, no offense to these guys, but I'm hoping not to see a lot of them. I mean, I think that's the natural thought. But I guess I would lean Brujan just to see. I mean, this is a guy who hasn't had success at the MLB level, but former top prospect, has speed. They've tried him in the outfield, and maybe you catch something there. You unlock something a little bit and see if the talent is there. But
Yeah, I
want to
mean,
go like solid defense. Maybe we have another situation where we have a third baseman who can't hit, but like the defense will be good and pair with Dansby and Nico, if Matt Shaw is out or whatever it might be. I think Workman looks good over there. So
I think Workman looks very good defensively. I think the health of Matt Shaw is exactly going to determine how they start that season. If he's feeling healthy and Nico comes back and he's feeling healthy, then the defensive versatility Brujan offers may not be as needed should Nico have to recover longer or Matt Shaw's not ready yet. So the assumption, if Nico and Shaw are healthy, I would, given what I've seen so far, probably just go with Workman. I think the 70 out of 80 grade defense intrigues me. I think he also provides backup shortstop depth, even though Brujan does as well. But just that defensive competency is really intriguing.
yeah,
And I just would default to that. That seems more of a certainty than
sure.
Vidal Brujan's speed
Yeah.
in terms of having value on the
A
base pass.
useful asset. Yeah.
Yeah, he may not even be on the base pass that much to show the showcase that speed. So I would go with Workman.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't have a problem with that. Help your pitching staff out. If you're unsure of what the bat's going to be over there anyway, whether whoever's playing at third, opt for the defense. Make sure that you're scooping up outs and doing good work for your pitching staff that hopefully is generating a good amount of weak contact over there.
I will say, if you want to see how Brujan works out, of course, 4 years, limited offensive success. He still last year in 276 plate appearances, again, bad value, replacement level, but the Cubs may be seeing the speed, defensive versatility, and maybe that raw athleticism that lends to league average, to slightly above league average contact, and a chase rate that was slightly better than league average. They may be thinking he just needs to see more plate appearances. Likely, though, he's not going to be an offensive guy, but that may be what the Cubs are hoping in a best case scenario he shows over the next 3 weeks in spring.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. It's going to be interesting, and like we said, kind of when we were talking about Justin Turner and the third base situation in the first place, like it's not the most exciting conversation. I'm sure there are a lot of people that, as I said, if either of them are getting a significant amount of playing time, it's probably not good news for something going on with the Cubs. But as you're seeing, like these injuries pop up, and they're popping up to start the year for some of these guys. So having that depth is going to be important. We've talked so much about the amount of playing time this organization has given to sub replacement level players or people that are just black holes at the end of their lineup. And not saying that these guys are going to be any different. And as I said, hopefully it's not a significant amount of playing time, but hopefully you get whatever decision they end up making right. And whoever you're adding to the back of this bench and whoever's getting opportunities, I would imagine John Birdie is first, but if it's not, like, you hope that they can just contribute in what is hopefully a limited amount of time. But these are the types of decisions, however small they seem, Brendan, that this organization has not done the best job of. Some successes, but there's been a lot of failures in this area in terms of filling out that back of the roster and having that quality depth that doesn't make you feel like, a guy missing 5 games to start the year is the end of the world. But if you don't have that quality backup, it may feel that way.
Do we undervalue John Birdie? I mean, I understand he's 35 years old. Last season, injury riddled season. The year before that, put up over 2 WAR with a 325 WOBA. The year before that, also a 2 WAR with slightly less offense, but still 90 WRC plus. Is it just the recency of being injured and the age that makes us never talk about John Birdie?
I think it was like the timing of the Bregman stuff. Like I think people are just gonna be like, this is not, as I said, and I do feel that way. Like I want Shaw to get the lion's share of the playing time. I want him to hold down the job, whatever. But I've repeated that, him getting hurt or something like that is not the only reason that you may want to have that quality backup. If you feel like he's overmatched at the big league level, or you want him in certain matchups, you need somebody else to play at third base and be giving you quality stuff. And like, listen, John Birdie was starting World Series games. Like he's playing big games for the New York Yankees. So it's not a knock on him, but I think pairing that with like, maybe they were going to get Alex Bregman. And then it's like, well, actually instead of Shaw being this Javi Baez 2016-esque super utility man and Alex Bregman at third base, it's like it's Shaw or bust. And if that doesn't work for any reason, good or bad, it's John Birdie. I don't think we're undervaluing him. I think it's just sort of the circumstance.
I think some of the traits, though, do go under-recognized. I'm not vouching for John Birdie getting significant playing time, by the way, but 35 years old, my assumption is, well, the athleticism is deteriorating. So I go and check if that's the case. I did not realize 2023, age 33 season, his sprint speed was in the 95th percentile, John Birdie. Did you know he was that fast? Honestly. No. Did you know he was that fast?
No. I knew he had speed.
95th percentile, John Birdie? I had no idea. So then the question is, he barely played last year. What was it last year? 90th percentile as looming 35-year-old. Yeah. He's fast. You look at the chase rate. Well, does he swing at bad pitches? 90th percentile in chase rate. Does he strike out? Well, he's in the 90th percentile too. So he has the traits that you hope Vidal Brujan aspires to. Again, I'm not vouching for John Birdie, but I do think the logic, the money does make some sense.
Yeah, I mean, in a vacuum, I don't have any beef with it. It's just like I was
just surprised to see those traits speed extreme, though. That's the reason I pointed it out. Like the sprint speed's crazy, Corey. I had no idea.
Yeah, I mean, look, I suppose if you're going to take flyers on guys or hope that they're, in certain roles and things like that, like find guys that have the tools, and see if you can utilize them in some way.
I do wonder if you look at just like sprint speed over time, if that predicts like offensive output. Like if sprint speed goes down over time, does that like predict the decline in offensive value? Someone should do that because that's like a proxy for athleticism, is it not?
This is an assignment for you. Who's this other someone that's doing this?
I don't want to do that. We'll have Jared do it. I see Jared in his Mesa hotel room in the backstage over here.
Yeah. Yes, we're going to do our second ad break in a couple minutes here, and then we're going to bring our guy Jared Willis in to give us a spring training report. Yeah, I think that wraps up like the position player stuff. It's been cool to see Kyle Tucker out there, obviously. We Jared and I talked about it on Friday last week. You and I talked about it preemptively. Like I like the Justin Turner move. I think, that's a guy that whether he can play third or not, like that's a guy who really understands hitting. And I know people are going to be concerned about the age. But when you look at the way he's readjusted his swing, his walk rate over the years, his K rate over the years, like I think he's going to be able. I would be very surprised, Brendan, if he totally cratered and was not at least a slightly above average hitter for this team.
Really?
In the situations, you wouldn't be a little surprised?
He's 40 years old, dude.
Sure, but nothing in his career is necessarily suggesting that's imminent like that.
Go select plus 40-year-old players in the past 20 years. They're all Hall of Famers. So he would be an outlier. He'd be the only non-Hall of Famer to do this.
All I'm saying is I would be surprised if he's putting up like a 60 WRC plus. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if he puts up like a below 100. For me, I need him to be above 100. Just saying. $6 million, former Dodger, all the pain he caused. I need above 100.
Look, I know. And, I told the story about my mom's feelings on him. So,
you're just giving
probably
a lot
not
of
happy
Justin
with me
Turner
saying this, but I just feel like he's one of those cerebral hitters that I think can manage in the matchups the Cubs put him in, which should be selective and favorable to him. I think he can be productive for the team.
Honestly,
And
so do I.
I
really
like
do.
the veteran aspect of it. And like other than that, I feel like the position stuff is, there's a lot of little battles going on and a couple guys' health, but otherwise, we kind of know what the deal is across the diamond, and I'm looking forward to it. Michael Busch hit a long home run earlier this week. Very excited to see his sophomore season. So hopefully those guys get healthy, and hopefully we don't have to deal too much, with the depth and with the backups and stuff like that. But at least potentially in Japan, for Nico Horner, for sure, it sounds like, and possibly for Matt Shaw, those decisions are going to get tested, and who gets those playing time and how they build out that roster is something they are going to have to think pretty consciously about in the at least probably first few weeks of the season, before everybody's healthy and you're really able to get into a rhythm of we play basically the same 9 to 10, 11 guys every day. And we'll see. So let's hit our second ad break here. Then we're going to bring our guy Jared Willison, get a report from Mesa, and then later in the show too, we'll hear from Brendan on some of the pitching depth and how excited everyone is about one Brad Keller after some of what he's shown in spring training. So we will be back in a second here after our second ad break.
Is there any better combination than Hooters and Chicago sports? What makes the original Hooters so special? It's simple. They care about their people, the food they serve, their guests, and their community. It's an experience like no other based on years of hard work. Hooters is also donating a portion of chicken wing sales to Holy Family Schools, helping fund tuition, books, classroom supplies, and more for kids in under-resourced communities. With the support of our Chicagoland Hooters family, we've raised over $1 million since 1992. Hot wings, cold beer, and your favorite cheerleaders, the Hooters girls. 9 out of 10 Hooters girls agree that eating Hooters wings while watching the game will help your team win. Cheer on your favorite teams from any of the 11 Chicagoland Hooters locations: Juliet, Lansing, Melrose Park, and so on, O'Hare. You can even order online for pickup and delivery. So check them out at originalhooters.com. Auto show deals are going on now at Ray Chevrolet in Fox Lake. That means the latest vehicles you've been looking for are now priced with huge auto show savings, like $11,000 off MSRP on new Chevy models, or check them out and their selection of over 125 vehicles priced under $20,000 with one of Chicagoland's largest Chicago inventories. You're sure to find the perfect vehicle for you. And as one of the top selling Chevy dealers in the Midwest, they're able to keep their prices competitive, so you'll get a great deal. Go see for yourself. Visit our partner this February at their convenient location right on Route 12 in Fox Lake. And don't miss out on their auto show sales event going on all month long. Be the star of the show and take $11,000 off MSRP today by shopping Ray Chevrolet in Fox Lake or at raychevrolet.com. They've been serving the community since 1963. Together, let's drive.
All right, Brennan, let's see if I can do this without ruining this stream.
Well, we'll figure it out, Look at that. Look at that. Wow. Look at your guys' beards, I feel like I have a place over here.
That's so generous. Jared's is like a real adult, quality.
We'll put him in the middle over here. There you go.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Front and center.
All right, Jared, how is it out in Arizona?
It's beautiful. It's spring training. It's Mesa. The weather's great. I can't believe it's like February and it was over 80 degrees today, and I was out walking in the sun. Coming from Chicago.
You put sunscreen on?
No. Like
what are we doing? You gotta put sunscreen on.
I go right out in it, and then I get burned. I'm like, oh yeah, I need sunscreen.
Rookie mistake, Jared. Rookie mistake.
It is. It's a rookie mistake that I make annually.
Well, I had the worst sunburn of my life in Mesa like 15 years ago. I had tan lines for 3 years afterwards. It was awful.
Brendan's the skincare man, but
that's just a healthcare thing.
Jared, I want to ask. I have a few questions. I think I know you haven't been there for long, but I think to start, I know you got, you guys were able to talk and, watch Jordan Wicks on Thursday afternoon. So just curious your thoughts there, as he's been working back from the injuries and stuff, like just how he looked. I was able to see obviously the comments that he gave to you in the media, but just your impression of how he looks, how he feels, and kind of how he's gonna hit the ground running this season.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he looked sharp on Thursday. He had the one, he gave up a couple of hard hits, early, especially. There was the Tim Anderson home run. But we asked him about that afterward, and he said, it was just a fastball that didn't go where he wanted it to go. No big deal. One of those kinds of pitches. But the most interesting thing, I think, is Wicks talked about how much he enjoyed throwing to Carson Kelly. Because he said, anytime you get to work with a new catcher, it's, it shows you some things. You sometimes take a different approach. And he said Kelly had him throwing more sliders to right-handers than he typically would. So he was, enjoying kind of experimenting with that a little bit, and said that his breaking pitches felt pretty good coming out of his hand, which, for your second start of spring, that's noteworthy to me, because usually, these guys will tell you it takes a little while for the breaking pitches to come around. He said he only threw 3 curveballs, but said that those felt good as well. So he's, as far as his execution on Thursday, he looked good. He felt good about it. So he's definitely trending in the right direction. But we did also ask him about, his role. And he kind of joked about, I don't know whether I'm going to Japan or not, or if I do, how they're going to use me. But mostly, I mean, he's preparing to be a starter, knowing that there is some starting pitching depth, and him starting might not mean in Chicago.
Was the curveball and slider statement unprompted? Was he asked about specific pitch types, or did he voluntarily bring that up?
He brought that up when he was asked about. Yeah, he was asked about throwing to Carson Kelly, and as a part of that answer, he kind of brought that up on his own. And so it sounded like that was something that Kelly suggested that he try. And it probably the kind of thing that in spring you play around with some of this stuff a little more. You're experimenting, you're trying some stuff. I did ask him about, like, how comfortable, or what would it take for you to feel comfortable throwing that pitch to right-handers more often during like a regular season game. And he said, it felt good today, but that's also the kind of thing that he's going to want to get a lot more reps with before.
Well, it's quite surprising to hear that, to be honest with you, because his changeup is so good to right-handed batters. It fades away. You probably don't want to be throwing sliders to righties, but go for it. Have fun.
It worked pretty well today. And it may end up being one of these things that, we're like, remember in spring training when we thought this was going to be a thing, and it just doesn't become one. But no, it was mostly a comment that came out of, hey, I enjoyed throwing to Carson Kelly, and this is one thing that we were playing around with. So, he brought that up on his own.
That's what you want to hear. I feel like we've heard that. I mean, I guess they've been turning over the catcher position a good amount in the last few years, but right. Like, I feel like we've heard that about Yan Gomes, Kyle Hendricks talking about like Miguel Amaya. Well, it's not that I don't believe them. It's
Wilson Contreras too, right?
I don't know if anybody ever said that, but
I think Kyle Hendricks did, actually.
We're going to leave that one alone.
I think Kyle would say that about everybody.
That's true. I could be catching Kyle Hendricks to be saying something nice.
Yeah, yes, unrelated to anything, but not a fan. I certainly wasn't banging the drum for bringing him back, but I am not a fan of. I've seen Kyle Hendricks in Angels red, and it doesn't feel right.
Well, it doesn't exist. I don't even.
Yeah, we'll pretend. Yeah, it's like John Lester's last team. It never happened. We don't have to acknowledge it.
No.
So, Jared, another thing I wanted to ask you, and I know this is hard to maybe get a feel of in a short amount of time, but I feel like we've talked a good bit about some of the veteran presence that the Cubs have on this roster. Obviously, they already had some with a guy and a leader like Dansby Swanson, Ian Happ, who's been here for a long time, but bringing in a guy like Presley in the bullpen and how he might be able to work with the younger guys, and obviously Justin Turner and how he might, are you able to get a sense at all of the kind of leadership, or I don't know if it's like the vibe that I'm asking about, but I know it's always hard to, articulate those things, but just curious if you saw anything that looks like that or feels like that, or anybody talked about stuff like that.
Well, it did definitely come up with regards to Justin Turner. Dustin Kelly talked about the impact that Turner has had on all of the hitters, which is, it's the kind of thing that you see a lot with these veteran players when they come in, and some of the younger guys are kind of watching how they go about their work and taking in, their approach to different types of pitchers. And what Kelly talked about the most, though, was like the conversations that he's having with other hitters. He's the kind of guy who comes in and wants to talk about, his approach and at bats and how to handle different types of pitchers and that sort of thing. And Dustin Kelly said it was kind of like having another hitting coach around, which I thought was a interesting comment. You like to hear that, because for any of these guys, when you get somebody who has had the success at the plate that Justin Turner has, and they have a chance to pick his brain a little bit, even if he doesn't end up playing a whole lot for the Cubs, who knows? But sometimes these impacts that they have in spring, this stuff carries over. But that was a lot of the impression about Justin Turner was this is a guy who kind of geeks out over hitting. And so there was a lot of conversations going on. And just too, in general, I think there's always a feeling when somebody with his resume comes in, who's won the World Series, who's, played on some very successful teams. And we, Cubs fans don't need to be reminded of what Justin Turner did to them, some number of years ago, but that, that kind of stuff for younger batters or younger players in general, you seize that opportunity when someone like that comes around.
Sure.
And you do see that happening, which is a good thing. So I haven't seen as much with Presley just because, I haven't been around to kind of yet to take that in, but he did pitch on Thursday and looked pretty sharp as well. But yeah, I do think you may see some kind of intangible sorts of differences with some of these guys because of having a guy like Justin Turner around, Ryan Presley, and some of those other ones.
Well, I mean, you look at the leg kick. Everyone's pointing to the leg kick of Matt Shaw and Justin Turner. Matt Shaw, the reports that we hear is he's a psycho. He's the first one on the fields. He's taking it all in. And specifically the fact that he is supposedly, I'm not sure if you saw it yourself, but actually one of the first guys on the fields. I love that. He was working with Dansby Swanson last year, taking grounders. We know he's been improving at third base. Now you bring in someone with at least some similarities in how you approach your at-bats at a position he's actively learning. And you had this dual parallelism where someone's taking his career from being optioned to become one of the better third basemen in the league. I feel as if that is almost the ideal mentor just because of those similarities.
Yeah. Well, and Brendan, like that's why I brought it up. And I'm actually it's really intriguing, I think, and nice that, Jared, like right away is like, yeah, Dustin Kelly was talking about that. Like, because it's, and the reason I asked Jared is it's one of those things that when they make those moves, it's a nice thing to say, like as a fan, but right. I'm not in that clubhouse. I'm not on that team. And, we've all played sports throughout our lives where maybe you're playing with an older player, a better player, and they're not always nice. They're not always willing to give advice. They're not always, a team first guy or things like that. I mean, I can't imagine our varsity star Brendan Miller over at
I was waiting for it. I was waiting for it. I was nice, man.
But so it's like one of those narrative kind of things that like, oh, they have such a great veteran group and stuff like that. But I know Brendan, like you've always pointed out over the years, like how Dansby's always the first person at the top of the step. Yeah. Like the stuff that we read about, we seem to be able to like actually see happen. And so it's, especially he's only been in camp for a week. He's only been a Cub for, a week and a half or whatever it is. That's, I do love hearing that about Justin Turner and that everybody's kind of gravitating toward that. And they're leaning into that a little bit, because I think they should. He's obviously a very valuable asset, hopefully on the field, but certainly within that clubhouse.
Yeah, and the fact that in such a short amount of time, that's the impression that he's leaving. Because you're right. There are plenty of examples of veteran players that are the opposite, where they don't want to talk to anybody. They want things done their way, and they're more concerned with their own routine and their own stuff, and they're not going to be bothered with talking to a younger player. But Shaw is the guy who he's been down here in Arizona for weeks now. I mean, he was doing work at third back in January. So he's clearly ready to get back on the field, because as we saw on Thursday, he's expects to be back in the lineup for Sunday's game. So yeah, it is a good thing that, like, whatever Justin Turner does for you in the box score, he's having some kind of a positive impact even before any of that happens, just from being around this team.
From the pitching perspective, has anything jumped out to you? For me, watching just the number of possibilities for this bullpen, that's one of the most intriguing storylines to follow. We heard Craig Counsell early in spring talk about Brad Keller. We're seeing a lot of guys in the back end of that roster. Phil Bickford pitched a couple days ago, for example, and we have so many options that they can pick from once even Japan starts, but also after Japan too, should they use some of those options. Anything jump out for you from the pitching side?
Yeah, they clearly tackled the problem of not having enough bullpen depth and not enough pitching depth last season. That's a big part of why things went the way they did in 2024. So they've stockpiled this army of pitchers. You're right, and one that you mentioned, Brad Keller, and one of the interesting things with him is they, depending on what they decide to do there are scouts that have already been calling the Cubs asking about Brad Keller because there's interest. So if they don't decide to roster him, then he's going to find a home somewhere. And so for the Cubs, I think that does impact their roster decision making with him.
Is it because of the velocity? We heard the velocity was upticked by about 2 miles per hour, hitting 96, 97. Is it specifically the velocity that's drawing the interest from what you're hearing?
I know that that's a part of it. I don't know that it necessarily boils down to that, but that's certainly a factor. Because it's caught a lot of attention. And so, anytime you have a guy throwing that hard, teams are going to notice, but especially when it's a veteran pitcher who has now added this velocity, that's an additional layer to it. So yeah, I think the Presley thing, he's most likely your closer, or at least that's the opportunity that he's probably going to be given. But otherwise, the rest of that bullpen, it is so intriguing. Like, who's going to go where, how's Counsell going to slot these guys? And so I do expect to see, once the season begins, we'll probably see a lot of trying guys in some different spots, because that's one thing that Counsell is good at, or at least has a track record of being good at. So it is going to be interesting to watch how he uses some of these guys even as spring training goes on.
I think we're going to have to we need to get them to tap in, you guys, to whatever the Dodgers do, where they're fake ILing every other guy on there, so they can just shuttle these guys back and forth. Because it is as we keep talking about, I know, Brendan, you've showed that list before and stuff like that. Like, you have a good number of guys that, I feel like even someone like Eli Morgan, I think, is maybe the best representation of this, that he has options and they may want to use them, but he's also been an effective reliever. You traded for him. Do you want to use that option to give the roster spot to someone who's maybe been successful in the past, but is more of a gamble because you just don't want to lose them? It's and even looking at the back of the rotation, as we were talking, to go back to the beginning of when you jumped on, like the Jordan Wicks thing, like who is starting at the back end of this rotation? How often are they starting? Are they healthy? How many of these guys do they want to keep on the active roster that are more in that, they could start if we need them to, but they could also be like a 2-3 inning reliever guy. It's a lot to sort through, and it's good. I like that they have the options. As you said, Jared, they've certainly addressed the lack of potential depth and like useful potential depth. But that creates its sort of own, I don't want to call it a problem, but just is something that this team is really going to have to think very carefully about. And it's going to be interesting to square that going back to last year in a situation with the bullpen where you're kind of leaning on those big three guys. And it felt like you did that for way too long and didn't really make some of the changes, even, the situation with Hector Neris, and kind of hoping that was going to straighten itself out, watching him blow, save after save and ALLCITY. So now you kind of flip that to where you have more options, but how aggressive do you want to be on some of these guys and kind of maneuvering this roster around?
Yeah, I think we talked about this before, but I do think given the number of guys that they brought on and the nature of some of the ones who have options and some of them that don't, where you might see some of these kind of what look on the surface like surprising decisions, like take Eli Morgan, for example. If they do use his option, it may have so much more to do with the fact that he has an option. And so we'll use that in order to keep someone else to at least give fair shake to this pitcher during the regular season, just to see what's there and take advantage of the fact that Eli Morgan has an option. And that's, and it's easy for me to say that but that's still a conversation you have to have with Eli Morgan and explain to him what your thinking is. And, guys,
I feel like Craig's pretty good at that. Just straight to the point, no nonsense.
He is. Yeah. Yeah. He, even in our media sessions, he'll give it to you a little bit if you ask a silly question or just word something funny. He does it in a good natured way. He's not,
Is he intimidating compared to other past managers you've talked with?
He's intimidating in a very different way, though. David Ross, I always felt like I didn't want to cross him. Just because like you could like the competitiveness, you could see that was like very much not too far beneath the surface. Yeah, part of the aura. Joe Madden was so like laid back that that was totally different. But Craig Counsell is intimidating because it's like he won't necessarily let you get away with asking a stupid question. He's very smart, and he doesn't like flaunt that, but he's a very smart guy. And you're going to know if you've asked something silly or stupid, because sometimes the answer that he gives you, or even just the look that he has on his face, you realize like, oh, that was dumb. What I just said. So
you're saying you're not going to ask him if someone looks like they're swinging for the lake, as an example off the top.
Right. Great example, because he will let you know that
I just made up. Yeah. No one.
Right.
I'm envisioning that, the fear of crossing David Ross comes from, that he's going to text John Lester and be like, hey, these guys over here. But Brennan, I do want to ask you, as we're talking about some of the pitching stuff, I do want to ask, like, of the guys, there's so many names, and I wanted to ask about Brad Keller in particular, like, and I'll ask you too, Jared, but Brendan first, like any of those guys that maybe you feel like are potentially on the bubble as far as the bullpen is concerned, that genuinely are a guy that really truly intrigues you as far as the changes they may be able to make. And, I'm not talking about guys like Porter Hodge or, some of the more obvious options, but a guy that is not a clear-cut, like solidified role in this bullpen that you look at and go, man, I'm really watching the rest of this spring training because I really think they might have something there. Is it Brad Keller after what we saw the other day?
I think it has to be. He's throwing 97, 98, the track record, the unique mechanics. If we just look at the back end of the depth chart on the far right, you'll see who they have to pick. In the yellow slots, if you're watching or listening to this on Spotify, come on over to YouTube. In the yellow slots are the fringe remaining guys to round up 13. So in green are the guys with options, and red are guys without options. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see Keegan Thompson, Brad Keller, Chris Flexen, Ethan Roberts, Gavin Hollowell, Trevor Richards. Each one of those guys has something unique. Keegan Thompson has 3 breaking pitches: curveball, cutter, sweeper. Brad Keller has a unique release point, a unique fastball, and is throwing faster. Chris Flexen has the same release point, give or take, as Brad Keller, one of those outlier type guys. Ethan Roberts' sweeper moves more than 95% of the league. These are outlier traits. So your question, is anyone interesting? Just because they're outliers makes them interesting. I don't know how they're going to perform in the next 3 to 4 weeks. I think it's going to be more agnostic in the review process from Craig. And the hope is they naturally find their place. From pure stuff, Ethan Roberts has the best pure stuff pitch. That sweeper is the best pure stuff pitch. The bulk repertoire is Brad Keller. He has the most diverse mix that could offer a lot of intrigue for lefties, righties, and starting pitching as well, with a unique release point. If I had to pick one who I hope gets a shot, it would be Brad Keller, just because of the cut right profile, the high release point, the capacity to have a new curveball too, should they work with him longer.
Well, and Jared, let me add a follow-up to the question. And maybe we get back to you, Brendan, but I'm curious, like, when thinking about this, how aggressive, maybe not might you be, but I guess where would your personal preference lie in terms of, I would rather take the risk and DFA a guy that, maybe is like, okay, but is out of options that, we're maybe on the fence about, and I want to go for that higher ceiling. I want to take the shot, and I'm willing to lose guys to do it. Or would your preference, even if it's just early in the season, be like, you know what, if the guys have options, let's use them. Let's exhaust what we can.
Ben Brown, Jordan Wicks, Cody Petit.
Yeah, like let's exhaust what we have from these guys first, and then DFA them if it doesn't work. Or would you say, you know what, this is the higher potential guy, we're going for it right away, DFA, whoever is getting in the way?
Yeah, I would, my inclination is toward the latter. I would prefer to see them use these options, even if, like I said earlier, those are some options that might not, or some roster decisions that might not look like the right decision on paper. Because I would like to see them take full advantage of testing what they have with some of these other pitchers, where there is, whether it's a veteran, or just somebody who is sort of a fringy kind of guy that they've picked up that you want to see what you have. I'd like to see them do that because of how volatile we know that bullpens especially can be. And the more you've tested what you have, I think the better shape you're going to be in as the season goes on. And so I'm okay with early in the season where you might have some guys who, even in April and even into May, you're still kind of testing some guys to some extent. And I know it gets frustrating to watch those games. And yes, there are times when it matters, when you realize in hindsight, we gave up some games in April that are now biting us in the butt in September. But that's a risk that I'm okay with, because I think you have some guys with options that you can afford to give opportunities to some other pitchers.
It's a risk. The risk is twofold. The first is trying to determine how much value you gain by rostering Ben Brown over someone like Brad Keller. And in a short sample, you can't confidently say, okay, he's going to be worth half a win. There's too much volatility there. The other risk, the other side is, if you don't properly account for your pitching depth, then your problem of just half a win becomes high leverage, blown saves like we saw in 2024. So my inclination is like yours, Jared, is to start the season off by buying as many lottery tickets as possible. This is kind of how it is. And if there's not a little inclination of change in the first week or 2 weeks and how guys improve or go through their different adaptation process, I do want them to cut bait fast. So it's a mix of both. It's give these guys chances, but we need to be a little bit urgent and properly assess the possibility of these guys, these lottery tickets, the Brad Keller types, of actually providing value in the short term.
Yeah, I'd be okay with have a short leash for those guys. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
that's I was just going to say that.
that's what I was going to say. I think that's one of the things. It's very easy to look back in hindsight, and I know in certain years they haven't had the best stable of options and things like that. But the speed to course correct, I feel like, is the easiest thing in hindsight to be like, they really should have moved faster on this. Like just running guys out there, getting the same result, like, and just letting it tank, you know, where they were and
the
how
problem is that they didn't have any reserve, you know.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Was like not there.
But this feels like they do.
Right.
And so that's where it's going to come in. And, you know, it's similar to even when we were talking about Justin Turner, where it's like guys are hurt to start the year, maybe a little bit, but generally, you know, Jared, you and I talked last week, you're not bringing him in to start, you know, and get 600 plate appearances. So if he's on your bench and he looks 40 and old and bad, move on. Like you're not like desperately needing that to work, you know, to like salvage your season. And so it does feel like that with this pitching staff. So I agree with you guys. I think I'm curious to see how they do it, but just you have a lot of options. You got a lot of intriguing guys that can play potentially different roles. Be aggressive, move stuff around. Like if somebody else is deserving of the start, give them the start. If you need to move guys down in the hierarchy of the bullpen, get them out of higher leverage, get them out of the bullpen entirely. Be aggressive. You loaded up on these options for a reason. I'd like to see them use it. Cool. Well, I think we can
manager Corey over there, you know, giving correct counsel tips.
Yeah. Well, you know, I was a bench coach in the Dominican Summer League.
Yeah, World Series champion
13 years ago, something like that. Them. So, you know, there's a picture of the team photo, and me and Jose Leclerc are standing like right next to each other. So
is that actually a real photo?
Yeah, I have it somewhere.
I got to see that. You got to send that to
me.
me.
I have a buzz cut and no beard, so you wouldn't recognize me.
What are you, 10 years old?
Yeah. All right, well, cool. So I do want to give Jared, obviously, a chance to tell us about your coverage when you're out in Mesa, where to find your stuff. I know you already had some stuff over at allchgo.com. We had some good Jordan Wicks video, but tell us, you know, where to look forward to stuff while you're out there.
Yeah, I'll be here for a couple more days, and so just keep an eye out for, you know, going to get more stuff like you saw with the Jordan Wicks video, and as much as possible from these players, particularly about some of that veteran impact. That's one of the things I do want to explore as I get into the clubhouse over the next few days. So yeah, keep an eye out for that on allchgo.com, and then of course our YouTube channel.
If you're able to, I mentioned it to Brendan earlier. I'm very curious. We saw a video of Sammy Sosa giving like swing mechanics to Vidal Brujan. Like,
ask him, what did you say over there?
What's the tip? You know, like what he tell you? Right. Like, you know, I am very curious about the insight that Sammy's offering.
You got to hop twice after you hit a home run. Not once, twice.
Two hops. Yeah.
Right. No, it was nothing about hitting. It was about the celebration.
It was all about celebration. There was some talk of Sammy's cage work with some of the guys. So I'm going to go around and ask a few of them about that.
Love it.
Sure.
Yeah. Love that. All right. Well, so be sure to follow along on Jared's trip out in Mesa. Brendan and I will talk to you again next week, and it's going to be March when we hop on next, Brendan. That means we are going to be just a handful of weeks away from Chicago Cubs baseball being on the air. I can't say I remember hearing Pat Hughes say that at 5 a.m. Central Time before. I am not a morning person, but I imagine that'll sound really nice regardless.
It sounds good no matter what time of day it is.
Yeah. 24 hours a day. So thank you as always for your support. Be sure to check out everything going on at allchgo.com. Brendan and I will talk to you again next week. And as always, go Cubs.
We all silly like the mayor.